Marcus had been training at the local dojo for exactly 3 months when he made the decision that would change everything. Every morning, he would pass by the royal palace gates on his way to work, watching the elite guards in their pristine uniforms conducting their morning drills. Their movements were sharp, precise, and intimidating. Most people would look away respectfully, but Marcus found himself studying their techniques with growing confidence. The 22-year-old construction worker had always been fascinated by martial arts, but it wasn't until his co-worker Jake dared him to join the neighborhood dojo that he actually stepped foot inside one. His instructor, Master Chen, was a patient man who emphasized discipline and respect above all else. Marcus absorbed every lesson eagerly, practicing kicks and punches in his small apartment until his downstairs neighbor complained about the noise. What Marcus lacked in experience, he made up for with enthusiasm and surprising natural ability. Within his first month, he had mastered basic forms that typically took beginners twice as long to learn. His kicks were powerful, his stance was solid, and his confidence grew with each passing day. Perhaps too much confidence. On that fateful Tuesday morning, Marcus arrived at the palace gates earlier than usual. The guards were in the middle of their training session, and he watched Captain Reynolds, the head of the Royal Guard, demonstrate a complex combination move to his subordinates. The captain was a mountain of a man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and a reputation that preceded him throughout the kingdom. Marcus studied the captain's technique and noticed what he believed to be a flaw in the form. The way Captain Reynolds positioned his left foot during the third strike seemed off balance to Marcus, based on what he had learned at the dojo. Without thinking it through, Marcus approached the iron gates and called out to the guards. The entire training session came to an abrupt halt. 12 elite guards turned to stare at the young man in work clothes who had the audacity to interrupt their morning routine. Captain Reynolds slowly walked toward the gate, his expression unreadable. The other guards exchanged glances, some suppressing smirks at what they assumed was about to be a very embarrassing moment for the civilian. Marcus felt his heart racing but refused to back down. He had come this far, and his pride wouldn't let him retreat now. He cleared his throat and spoke with more confidence than he actually felt, explaining that he had been observing their training and believed he could offer some constructive feedback on their techniques. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping as every eye focused on Marcus. Captain Reynolds reached the gate and gripped the iron bars, his knuckles turning white. The captain's voice was calm but carried an edge that made Marcus's stomach drop. He asked Marcus about his martial arts background and experience. Marcus straightened his shoulders and proudly announced his 3 months of training at Master Chen's dojo. He mentioned his rapid progress and his natural aptitude for combat sports. The guards behind Captain Reynolds began to chuckle, but the captain raised his hand for silence. His eyes never left Marcus's face as he listened to the young man's bold claims. What happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. Instead of dismissing him or calling security, Captain Reynolds opened the gate and invited Marcus inside the palace courtyard. The captain explained that if Marcus truly believed he had insights to offer the Royal Guard, he should be willing to demonstrate his skills in a friendly sparring match. Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. This was exactly what he had hoped for, but now that the opportunity was in front of him, he realized he might have bitten off more than he could chew. The other guards formed a circle around the training area, their expressions ranging from amused to incredulous. Captain Reynolds removed his ceremonial jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms covered in scars from years of combat training and real battles. He had served in 3 wars and had never lost a single combat encounter. His reputation was built on decades of disciplined training and actual fighting experience that Marcus couldn't even begin to imagine. As Marcus removed his work shirt and stretched his muscles, he tried to remember everything Master Chen had taught him about staying calm under pressure. The captain explained the rules of their friendly match. No weapons, first person to yield or be rendered unable to continue would lose, and medical staff would be standing by in case of injuries. The crowd of guards grew larger as word spread throughout the palace. Servants, administrators, and even some minor royalty gathered to witness what they expected to be a very brief and educational demonstration. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, and his confidence began to waver for the first time since making his bold challenge. Captain Reynolds took his fighting stance, a position perfected through years of training that immediately revealed the vast gap between his abilities and Marcus's beginner-level skills. The captain's stance was flawless, his balance perfect, and his eyes focused with the intensity of a predator sizing up his prey. Marcus mirrored the captain's stance as best he could, drawing on his 3 months of training and hoping that his natural ability would somehow level the playing field. The morning sun beat down on the courtyard as the two men faced each other, separated by only a few feet but worlds apart in terms of experience and skill. The tension in the air was palpable, as Captain Reynolds asked Marcus one final time if he was certain he wanted to proceed with the match. Marcus nodded firmly, sealing his fate and setting in motion events that would soon shock everyone present, including himself. The match began with Captain Reynolds circling Marcus slowly like a lion studying wounded prey. The crowd fell silent, expecting the encounter to end within seconds. Marcus tried to remember his breathing exercises from the dojo, but his heart was pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. The captain's movements were fluid and controlled, each step calculated and purposeful. Marcus decided to make the first move, launching into a combination he had practiced hundreds of times in Master Chen's dojo. His right jab was followed by a left hook, then a spinning kick that he had recently mastered. The sequence was executed with surprising speed and precision for someone with only 3 months of training. Captain Reynolds easily deflected the punches and stepped back from the kick, but something in his expression changed. The bored confidence was replaced by a flicker of interest. Marcus's technique was raw and unrefined, but there was power behind his strikes and an unpredictability that came from his limited training. Most beginners were either too cautious or completely reckless. Marcus seemed to occupy a strange middle ground that was difficult to read. Encouraged by the fact that he hadn't been immediately knocked unconscious, Marcus pressed his advantage. He threw a series of quick jabs, mixing high and low attacks in a pattern he had learned from watching mixed martial arts videos online. His unorthodox style, combining dojo techniques with moves he had seen on television, created a chaotic rhythm that even experienced fighters might find challenging to counter. Captain Reynolds blocked most of the strikes, but one of Marcus's low kicks connected with his shin. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was solid contact and the crowd gasped audibly. No one could remember the last time someone had successfully landed a strike against the captain during a demonstration. The guards exchanged surprised glances, and murmurs rippled through the gathering crowd. The captain's expression hardened, and he decided it was time to end this embarrassing display. He launched a devastating counterattack, throwing a perfectly executed combination that should have ended the match immediately. His right cross was aimed directly at Marcus's jaw, followed by a left uppercut that would have lifted the young man off his feet. But something extraordinary happened. Marcus's inexperience, which everyone assumed would be his downfall, became his unexpected advantage. Instead of trying to block the attacks properly, he stumbled backward in panic, accidentally avoiding the right cross entirely. The uppercut grazed his chin as he fell, but the lack of solid contact meant it didn't have the devastating effect the captain had intended. Marcus hit the ground hard but rolled instinctively, another move he had practiced during his brief training. He came up on one knee, breathing heavily but still conscious and determined to continue. The crowd was now completely silent, stunned by what they were witnessing. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Captain Reynolds paused, genuinely confused by what he was seeing. In his 20 years of combat experience, he had never encountered someone who fought like Marcus. The young man's movements were technically incorrect by military standards, but they were unpredictable and occasionally effective. It was like trying to fight someone who didn't know the rules of combat, making them impossible to anticipate. Marcus got back to his feet, his work clothes torn and dirty but his spirit unbroken. He had survived the captain's first serious attack, and that small victory filled him with renewed confidence. He began to circle the captain, copying the older man's earlier strategy while trying to formulate a plan. The captain decided to change tactics. Instead of overwhelming Marcus with power, he would use precision and technique to gradually wear him down. He threw a textbook jab, perfectly positioned, and timed to connect with Marcus's solar plexus. The strike should have doubled Marcus over and ended the fight. Marcus saw the punch coming but reacted in the most unconventional way possible. Instead of trying to block or dodge, he stepped forward and to the side, inadvertently executing a move that resembled an advanced counterattack technique he had never been taught. His shoulder collided with the captain's extended arm, disrupting the strike and putting him in close quarters where his shorter reach wasn't as much of a disadvantage. From this position, Marcus did the only thing that felt natural. He grabbed Captain Reynolds in what could generously be called a clinch and attempted a hip throw he had seen Master Chen demonstrate once. His execution was clumsy and technically incorrect, but his lower center of gravity and the element of surprise gave him just enough leverage to actually unbalance the much larger man. Captain Reynolds staggered but didn't fall. However, the fact that he had been moved at all sent shockwaves through the crowd. Several guards stepped forward, concerned that their leader might actually be in trouble. The captain waved them back, his pride now fully engaged. What had started as a routine demonstration had become something else entirely. Marcus released his grip and stepped back, as surprised as anyone by his partial success. His hands were shaking with adrenaline, but he felt more alive than he had in years. Every instinct told him he should quit while he was ahead, but the look in Captain Reynolds' eyes told him the real fight was just beginning. The captain rolled his shoulders and adjusted his stance, his entire demeanor shifting from casual demonstration mode to serious combat preparation. The crowd sensed the change in atmosphere and pressed closer, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in the palace's history. Marcus tried to steady his breathing and prepare for what he knew would be the captain's most serious assault yet. His beginner's luck had carried him further than anyone expected, but he could see in the captain's eyes that the time for surprises was over. The real test of his abilities was about to begin. Captain Reynolds had fought in 3 wars, trained elite soldiers for 2 decades, and never once doubted his supremacy in hand-to-hand combat. But as he looked across the courtyard at Marcus, wiping blood from a split lip, he didn't even remember. Receiving, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, including several high-ranking officials who had abandoned their morning duties to witness this unprecedented spectacle. Word was spreading throughout the palace that a construction worker was somehow holding his own against the legendary Captain Reynolds. Kitchen staff pressed against windows, and even the royal gardeners had stopped their work to watch. Marcus was exhausted. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his ribs ached from a glancing blow he had taken, and his left eye was beginning to swell. But something had awakened inside him during this fight, something that 3 months of dojo training had never revealed. When faced with real combat, his body seemed to move on instincts he didn't know he possessed. The captain launched his most technical combination yet, a series of strikes designed to systematically break down Marcus's defenses. Each punch and kick was placed with surgical precision, targeting specific pressure points and vulnerable areas. It was a beautiful display of martial artistry that would have been admired by masters around the world. But Marcus didn't try to counter it with technique. Instead, he did something that violated every principle of proper fighting form. He charged straight forward into the captain's attack, absorbing several painful strikes but managing to disrupt the combination's timing and flow. His reckless approach turned the elegant sequence into a chaotic brawl where technique mattered less than heart and determination. The 2 men crashed into each other like freight trains, trading blows at close range where neither could use their full power effectively. Marcus's construction work had given him deceptive strength in his shoulders and core, and he used every ounce of it to wrestle with a man who outweighed him by 40 pounds. Captain Reynolds tried to create distance so he could return to proper fighting form, but Marcus clung to him like his life depended on it. The young man seemed to understand instinctively that his only chance was to keep the fight ugly and unpredictable. Every time the captain tried to establish proper technique, Marcus would grab him, push him, or throw his body weight in unexpected, Directions. The crowd watched in stunned silence as their invincible captain struggled to gain control of a fight that should have ended in seconds. Several guards looked ready to intervene, but Captain Reynolds caught their eyes and shook his head firmly. His pride demanded that he finish this himself, regardless of how long it took. In the clinch, Marcus remembered a move Master Chen had shown the advanced students during one of their demonstrations. It was a throw called a sacrifice technique, where the attacker deliberately falls backward to use leverage and momentum to flip their opponent. Marcus had only seen it once and had never attempted it, but desperation made him willing to try anything. He wrapped his arms around the captain's waist, sat down hard, and rolled backward while pulling the larger man with him. The technique was executed with terrible form and should have failed completely. Instead, Captain Reynolds found himself flying through the air, too surprised to properly break his fall. The captain landed hard on his back with Marcus on top of him. For a moment, neither man moved. The crowd held its breath, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Then Marcus rolled away and struggled to his feet, leaving Captain Reynolds flat on his back, staring at the morning sky. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Captain Reynolds slowly sat up, his expression unreadable. He had been thrown by a beginner, not outfought, not overpowered by superior technique, but simply thrown by someone who didn't know enough to realize what he was attempting was nearly impossible. Marcus extended his hand to help the captain up, a gesture that surprised everyone present. His face was bruised and swollen, but he was smiling, not with arrogance or triumph, but with pure joy at having survived longer than anyone thought possible. He looked like a man who had just discovered something wonderful about himself. Captain Reynolds looked at the offered hand for a long moment, before accepting it and allowing Marcus to help him to his feet. As they stood face to face, the captain studied the young man's expression carefully. There was no mockery there, no attempt to humiliate or gloat. Marcus had fought with everything he had and was simply happy to still be standing. The crowd began to murmur as they processed what they had witnessed. A complete novice had not only survived against their legendary captain, but had actually managed to put him on the ground. It defied everything they thought they knew about martial arts and combat training. Captain Reynolds brushed the dust off his uniform and straightened his shoulders. His pride was wounded, but his warrior's instincts recognized something special in Marcus's performance. The young man's technique was non-existent, his form was atrocious, and his strategy was chaotic. Yet he had fought with a heart and determination that couldn't be taught in any dojo. Marcus was breathing heavily and swaying slightly on his feet, clearly exhausted from the encounter. He had given everything he had and more, pushing his untrained body far beyond its normal limits. The adrenaline that had sustained him was beginning to fade, and the reality of what he had just done was starting to sink in. The captain circled Marcus slowly, studying him with new respect. This wasn't over, yet, and both men knew it. The throw had been impressive, but it hadn't incapacitated the captain or ended the match. If anything, it had awakened something dangerous in the veteran fighter, something that had been dormant during what he had assumed would be a simple demonstration. Marcus tried to raise his guard again, but his arms felt like lead weights. His 3 months of training had not prepared him for a prolonged fight against an opponent of this caliber. Every muscle in his body was screaming for rest, but his spirit refused to yield. The transformation in Captain Reynolds was visible to everyone watching. The patient, controlled military instructor had been replaced by something far more dangerous, a warrior whose pride had been wounded in front of his subordinates. His movements became more aggressive, his stance lower and more predatory. The friendly demonstration had evolved into something resembling an actual battle. Marcus could see the change and felt a chill of fear run down his spine. Up until this point, he had sensed that the captain was holding back, treating this as a teaching moment rather than a real fight. But the look in the older man's eyes now was cold and focused in a way that made Marcus's instincts scream warnings. The cow. Captain's next attack came with lightning speed and devastating precision. A perfectly timed uppercut caught Marcus in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and lifting him slightly off the ground. Before he could recover, A follow-up strike hit him in the ribs with enough force to make him gasp in pain. Marcus stumbled backward, desperately trying to create distance and catch his breath, but Captain Reynolds pressed his advantage ruthlessly, closing the gap with professional efficiency. His strikes were no longer the measured demonstrations from earlier. They were the calculated attacks of a man who had decided to end this embarrassment, decisively. A devastating right hook caught Marcus on the side of his head, spinning him around and sending him crashing into one of the stone pillars that supported the courtyard's covered walkway. The impact knocked the wind out of him completely, and for a moment his vision went dark around the edges. The crowd winced collectively as Marcus slid down the pillar and landed in a heap on the stone floor. Several spectators looked away, unable to watch what appeared to be the inevitable conclusion of this mismatched contest. The guards who had initially been amused by the young man's audacity now looked concerned for his welfare. Captain Reynolds stood over Marcus's crumpled form, breathing heavily but still in complete control. He had proven his point and reasserted his dominance. The natural order had been restored, and this foolish challenge was finally over. He turned toward the crowd, ready to dismiss them and return to normal training routines, but behind him Marcus was struggling to his feet. His legs were shaky, his vision was blurred, and every breath sent shooting pains through his ribs. Common sense told him to stay down, to accept defeat gracefully and be grateful that he had lasted as long as he did. Instead, he used the pillar to pull himself upright and raised his fists once more. The captain turned back, genuinely surprised to see Marcus still standing. Most trained fighters would have stayed down after absorbing that level of punishment. The fact that this amateur was willing to continue fighting bordered on either courage or stupidity, and Captain Reynolds wasn't sure which. Marcus wiped blood from his nose and tried to focus his eyes on his opponent. His body was screaming at him to quit, but something deeper refused to surrender. He had come too far and endured too much to give up now. Win or lose, he would see this through to the end. The crowd fell silent again, stunned by Marcus's resilience. Even the guards who had been skeptical of his abilities began to show grudging respect for his determination. It takes a special kind of courage to keep fighting when outmatched so completely. Captain Reynolds approached more cautiously now, wary of Marcus's unpredictability. He had learned not to underestimate this young man, even in his weakened state. Marcus had already surprised him several times, and the captain wasn't willing to risk another embarrassing moment. Marcus knew he had one chance left. His body couldn't take much more punishment, and his opponent was no longer holding back. If he was going to make a final impression, it had to be now. He thought about everything Master Chen had taught him about using an opponent's strength against them, about timing and leverage being more important than raw power. The captain threw a measured jab, testing Marcus's remaining defenses. Instead of trying to block or dodge, Marcus did something completely unexpected. He stepped into the punch, accepting the blow to his shoulder while simultaneously grabbing the captain's extended arm. Using the last of his strength and every ounce of technique he could remember, Marcus attempted a move he had only seen in demonstration videos. An arm drag takedown combined with a leg sweep. His execution was far from perfect, but desperation and momentum carried him through. Captain Reynolds, caught off guard by the sudden reversal, found his weight shifted forward at exactly the wrong moment. Marcus's leg sweep, weak though it was, caught him as he was already off balance. For the second time in the match, the legendary captain found himself falling. This time, Marcus fell with him, both men crashing to the stone floor in a tangle of limbs. They rolled and struggled, each trying to gain a dominant position. Marcus's construction work had given him a strong grip, and he held on desperately while the captain tried to break free and regain his footing. For nearly 30 seconds, the two men grappled on the ground while the crowd watched in amazement. Marcus was clearly outmatched, but his determination and surprising ground instincts kept him competitive even against the captain's superior training. Finally, Captain Reynolds managed to break Marcus's grip and roll away. Both men struggled to their feet, breathing heavily and covered in dust from the courtyard floor. They faced each other once more, but something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between them. Marcus was barely standing, his face swollen, and his movement sluggish from exhaustion and accumulated damage. But he had proven something that no one, including himself, had believed possible. He had not only survived against one of the kingdom's most feared warriors, but had actually managed to take him down twice. Captain Reynolds looked at Marcus with new eyes. The young man's technique was still terrible, his strategy was chaotic, and his formal training was minimal. But his heart was that of a true fighter, and his instincts were remarkable for someone so inexperienced. The captain made a decision that surprised everyone present, including himself. Instead of finishing the fight with one final devastating attack, he stepped back and raised his hand, calling for a pause in the action. Captain Reynolds stood motionless for a long moment, his chest rising and falling as he studied Marcus's battered but defiant face. The courtyard was so quiet that the sound of Marcus's labored breathing seemed to echo off the stone walls. 50 pairs of eyes watched the captain, waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve. Marcus swayed slightly on his feet, using every ounce of willpower to remain upright. His vision was blurry, his ribs felt like they might be cracked, and his left arm was beginning to go numb from a strike he barely remembered receiving. But his eyes never left the captain's face, and his fists remained raised in a guard position that was more symbolic than functional at this point. 3. Captain slowly lowered his own hands and straightened from his fighting stance. The aggressive energy that had transformed him into a dangerous predator began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. He walked toward Marcus, who tensed for what he assumed would be the final, devastating blow. Instead, Captain Reynolds stopped just out of striking distance and spoke in a voice loud enough for the entire crowd to hear. He announced that the match was over, not because Marcus had been defeated, but because he had proven something far more valuable than technical skill or formal training. The crowd stirred with confusion and whispered conversations. This wasn't how these demonstrations usually ended. Typically, the civilian would be quickly and efficiently defeated, providing a clear lesson about the superiority of professional military training. But Marcus had rewritten the script entirely. Captain Reynolds explained to the gathering that in his 20 years of training soldiers, he had seen thousands of men with perfect technique, flawless form, and years of disciplined practice. Many of them were competent fighters who could execute complex combinations and demonstrate textbook moves, but very few possessed what Marcus had shown today, the heart of a true warrior. He pointed out that Marcus had entered this fight with only 3 months of basic training against an opponent with decades of experience. The outcome should have been determined before the first blow was struck. Yet Marcus had not only survived, but had actually managed to surprise and challenge a veteran fighter through sheer determination and natural instinct. The captain continued his address, explaining that technique could be taught, form could be corrected, and strategy could be learned. But the warrior's spirit that Marcus had displayed was something that couldn't be trained into someone. It was either present from birth or it wasn't, and Marcus clearly possessed it in abundance. Marcus listened to these words with growing amazement, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. He had expected to be dismissed as a foolish amateur who had gotten lucky a few times. Instead, he was being praised by one of the kingdom's most respected military leaders in front of an audience that included palace officials and royal guards. Captain Reynolds then made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the crowd. He offered Marcus a position in the Royal Guard's training program, with the opportunity to develop his natural abilities under proper instruction. It was an honor that was typically reserved for candidates with military backgrounds or years of documented martial arts achievement. Several guards exchanged startled glances, and murmurs rippled through the crowd of spectators. The Royal Guard was an elite unit with standards so high that even experienced soldiers were sometimes rejected. The idea of accepting someone with Marcus's minimal background was unprecedented. Marcus felt his knees go weak, and not just from exhaustion. The offer was beyond anything he had ever dreamed possible when he made his impulsive challenge that morning. He had simply wanted to test himself against a skilled opponent, never imagining it could lead to a complete transformation of his life's direction. The captain explained that Marcus would need to start at the bottom of the training hierarchy, and work his way up through merit rather than shortcuts. His technique would need complete reconstruction, his conditioning would require months of intensive work, and his understanding of military discipline and protocol would need to be built from scratch. But Captain Reynolds emphasized that Marcus's performance today had revealed raw potential that was worth investing in. The captain had seen too many technically proficient fighters who crumbled under real pressure, while Marcus had shown the kind of mental toughness and adaptability that couldn't be artificially created. Marcus tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him entirely. The combination of physical exhaustion, emotional overwhelm, and sheer disbelief left him unable to form coherent words. He nodded repeatedly, hoping to convey his acceptance of the incredible opportunity being offered. The crowd began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to genuine enthusiasm. What had started as entertainment at the expense of an overconfident amateur had transformed into recognition of something special. Even the guards who had initially been skeptical seemed impressed by Marcus's journey from construction worker to potential Royal Guard candidate. Captain Reynolds approached Marcus and extended his hand, not for a handshake, but to steady the young man who was clearly struggling to remain on his feet. The gesture was both practical and symbolic, representing the beginning of Marcus's transformation from civilian challenger to military prospect. As the captain helped Marcus toward the IB medical station that had been standing by, he quietly shared some advice that only Marcus could hear. He warned that the real challenges were just beginning, that military training would make today's fight seem like a gentle warm-up exercise, and that many candidates with more experience than Marcus had failed to complete the program. But he also told Marcus that what he had shown today couldn't be taught or faked. The determination to keep fighting when outmatched, the instinct to find unconventional solutions under pressure, and the courage to challenge himself against impossible odds were qualities that the Royal Guard desperately needed. Marcus managed to find his voice long enough to thank the captain and accept the position formally. As medical personnel began examining his injuries, he looked around the courtyard that had become the stage for his life's most important turning point, hardly able to believe that his impulsive morning challenge had led to this extraordinary outcome. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the same courtyard where his life had changed forever. But everything about him was different. The soft construction worker who had stumbled into a fight through pure audacity had been replaced by someone harder, more disciplined, and infinitely more skilled. His shoulders were broader from intensive training, his stance was solid and balanced, and his eyes held the focused intensity of a developing warrior. The Royal Guard training program had been everything. Captain Reynolds approached Marcus as the ceremony began to wind down, carrying a small package wrapped in cloth. The captain explained that it was a tradition for new guards to receive a personal weapon upon graduation, something that would serve as both a tool and a symbol of their commitment to protecting the kingdom. Marcus unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully crafted sword, its blade gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. The captain explained that he had personally selected this weapon for Marcus, choosing one that would complement his unique fighting style. The sword was slightly shorter and lighter than the standard issue, designed for speed and versatility, rather than pure power. As Marcus held the weapon, feeling its perfect balance in his hands, Captain Reynolds shared one final piece of wisdom. He told Marcus that his journey was just beginning, that becoming a Royal Guard was not an end point but a starting point for even greater challenges and opportunities. The captain mentioned that Marcus's story had already begun to spread throughout the kingdom, inspiring other young people to pursue their dreams regardless of their background or circumstances. Letters had arrived from across the land, written by people who had heard about the construction worker who dared to challenge the Royal Guard and succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility settling on his shoulders alongside his new uniform. He realized that his actions had consequences far beyond his personal achievement. He had become a symbol of what was possible when courage met determination, and people were looking to him as proof that extraordinary things could happen to ordinary individuals. As the crowd began to disperse and his fellow graduates prepared to take up their new duties, Marcus made a silent promise to himself. He would honor the opportunity he had been given, not just through excellent service as a guard, but by continuing to embody the spirit of determination and humility that had brought him this far. The sun was setting over the palace walls as Marcus walked toward his new quarters, the sword at his side and his future stretching out before him like an uncharted territory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the faith that so many people had placed in him. He paused at the palace gates where this incredible journey had begun, remembering the nervous construction worker who had approached these same iron bars with nothing but audacity, and a belief that he might have something valuable to offer. That young man's wild dream had become reality through persistence, sacrifice, and the willingness to risk everything for a chance at something greater. Marcus smiled as he realized that somewhere in the kingdom, another young person might be working up the courage to pursue their own impossible dream. Perhaps his story would give them the inspiration they needed to take that first terrifying step toward their destiny. The palace gates closed behind him as Marcus began his new life as a royal guard, carrying with him the lessons learned from a single moment of courage that had changed everything. His journey from construction worker to palace defender would be remembered for generations, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest act of believing in yourself enough to try. Had warned him it would be and more. The first month had nearly broken him completely. His fellow recruits, all of whom had years of military or martial arts background, initially treated him like a curiosity at best and a liability at worst. The instructors pushed him harder than anyone else, testing whether his spirit could survive the systematic destruction and rebuilding that military training required. Marcus had wanted to quit at least once every week during those early days. The physical demands were brutal, but the mental challenges were worse. Learning to suppress his individualistic instincts and function as part of a unit went against everything that had made him successful in his famous fight. He had to unlearn his chaotic, unpredictable style and rebuild his fighting foundation using proper technique and disciplined forms. But the same stubborn determination that had kept him standing against Captain Reynolds carried him through the darkest moments of his training. When other recruits were relaxing during breaks, Marcus was practicing forms in empty rooms. When others complained about the difficulty of certain exercises, Marcus simply worked harder until he mastered them. Master Chen from his old dojo had visited him once during the second month of training. Barely recognizing the transformed young man who had once been his enthusiastic but crude student, Marcus's movements were now precise and controlled. His techniques were textbook perfect, and his understanding of combat principles had grown exponentially. Captain Reynolds had personally overseen much of Marcus's development, taking a special interest in ensuring that his natural warrior instincts weren't completely trained out of him in favor of rigid military protocol. The captain understood that Marcus's greatest strength lay in his ability to think and react outside conventional parameters, and he worked to preserve that quality while building proper technical skills around it. The other recruits' attitudes toward Marcus had gradually shifted from skepticism to respect as they witnessed his incredible dedication and rapid improvement. Several of them had asked him to share the story of his famous challenge, and Marcus had become something of a legend among the trainees for his courage in facing impossible odds. Now, as Marcus prepared for his graduation ceremony from the training program, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The scared construction worker who had made an impulsive challenge was gone, replaced by someone who had earned his place among the kingdom's elite guards through months of backbreaking work and unwavering commitment. The ceremony took place in the same courtyard where his adventure had begun, with many of the same spectators who had witnessed his unlikely performance against Captain Reynolds. But this time, he wasn't the underdog challenger fighting against impossible odds. He was a fully trained member of the Royal Guard, having achieved something that most people could only dream about. Captain Reynolds presented Marcus with his official guard insignia and uniform, speaking briefly about the young man's remarkable transformation. He mentioned that Marcus had not only completed the training program, but had finished in the top quarter of his class, despite starting with less experience than any recruit in the program's history. The captain also revealed something that surprised Marcus and everyone else present. During the famous fight 3 months earlier, Captain Reynolds had actually been more impressed by Marcus's character than his fighting ability. The young man's willingness to help his opponent up after knocking him down, his lack of arrogance despite his success, and his obvious joy in simply testing himself against a worthy challenge had revealed a personality perfectly suited for the Royal Guard's values. Marcus's family attended the ceremony, including his parents, who had initially thought his decision to leave construction work for military service was completely insane. Seeing their son in his crisp guard uniform, standing tall and confident among his fellow graduates, they finally understood that he had found his true calling. Master Chen was also present, beaming with pride at his former student's achievement. He had never expected that the eager beginner who had joined his dojo would go on to become a member of the Royal Guard. Marcus sought him out after the ceremony to thank him for providing the foundation that had made everything else possible. As the celebration continued around him, Marcus found a quiet moment to stand alone in the spot where his life had changed. He thought about the construction worker who had impulsively challenged the kingdom's most feared fighter, driven by nothing more than youthful confidence and a desire to prove himself. That person seemed like a stranger now, but Marcus was grateful for his reckless courage. Without that moment of audacious bravery, he would still be laying bricks and wondering what he might have accomplished with his life. Instead, he had discovered his true potential and earned a place among the kingdom's defenders. Captain Reynolds